This upcoming lunar eclipse in Pisces is going to bring on some very drastic, unexpected, and sudden realizations and shift in circumstances and changes just in general. And it's because this lunar eclipse, which is a supercharged full moon, conjunct the lunar nodes, is in a T-square with Uranus. Let's get into it. So here is the chart for the lunar eclipse. And as you can see, the sun is in Virgo and the moon is in Pisces, and they are very close to the lunar nodes. The lunar nodes just changed signs this month. So they are moving on out of this Virgo Pisces axis story that they've been telling and what's been unfolding over the last year and a half. And they are now entering a whole new chapter, a whole new axis to explore. But what makes this interesting is that the sun and the moon are still very close to the lunar nodes, and this is like a final wrap up of this nodal story that we've been exploring. The sun and the moon are squaring Uranus, and Uranus is a planet of drastic change, of epiphanies and aha moments. It also can give us unexpected outcomes or even unexpected surprises that enter our lives and that just change the course of everything. And of course, because it's eclipse season, the changes and the shifts that happen during this time become a lot more prominent and a lot more powerful. The only thing that I'm seeing with this chart is that the information is there, the illumination, the recognition is all there, but the action of how to move forward is not. And it feels very stuck. And I'll explain that in a moment. It is a mutable sign eclipse, and the T-square is also an immutable sign, which usually encompasses this need for fluidity and adaptability and change. But we have a couple of things in the chart that makes us feel like we are trying to run through water. And as much as the information is valuable, it still feels a little bit powerless in this moment. So this eclipse is peaking on August 28th at midnight, at around midnight Eastern time. Adjust your time zone as needed. If you are on the West Coast, go back a few hours. If you are in Europe, move forward a few hours. So it's going to be August 27, August 28, depending on where you are. We're looking at a lunar eclipse between the Virgo and Pisces axes. Virgo is all about observing and analyzing, categorizing, diagnosing, and organizing, and a lot of discernment. There's a lot of intellectual processing happening. And its ruler is Mercury, and Mercury is in its sign. So with the Mercury and Sun conjunction in this sign, it makes Virgo themes of how can we make things function better? How can we improve the process? How can we create a plan that has the highest efficiency? Or how can we improve our relationship on a deeper level? What is it that is creating problems from the root, right? Like, what is the root problem? This is very Virgo way of thinking. It likes to dig a little bit deeper, and it likes to clear and process and ensure that everything is in its most tip-top shape. And it understands as a mutable sign that that tip-top shape is going to shift and change and adjust as we move through life. Nothing ever stays complacent or permanent. Everything moves through its own version of a cycle, and Virgo is here for it. It's here for the cycle, and it's here to evaluate every stage of the cycle and adjust its plan based off of where it lands in the cycle. So here we are at a culmination point, at a peak point, where the moon in Pisces is absorbing the entire field, right? Virgo is very detail oriented, and Pisces is all about the oneness of everything. The whole ocean rather than each droplet and each fish in the ocean. The Piscean experience is very intuitive, it's very emotional, it's extremely spiritual and felt. Everything blends together. Everything is one. Pisces doesn't necessarily need the information and the details to be categorized and organized to understand it. It's not as much of a rational sign. It's a water sign. And water signs are very internal, very introspective, and they're very emotional and intuitive and spiritual. There is a deep connection with the soul when it comes to Pisces and water signs in general. Now, with this T square with Uranus, we are looking at sudden information, unexpected changes, breakthroughs, epiphanies, disruptions, rapid changes, things that are just shifting at a very quick speed. And with it being in Gemini, we are processing information a lot faster than we can even comprehend. We are having conversations with people very differently than we used to. We are using AI in order to gain information and collect facts and collect information than we ever did in the past. And this is very much Uranus and Gemini. Gemini is this sign of our mental energy, right? It's ruled by Mercury as well, but it's different in the sense that it collects the information, but it's not quite organizing the information. It's more like it's curious, it wants to receive, and then it's on to the next thing. It kind of stays a little bit superficial. And I'm not saying that Gemini is superficial, but it stays superficial in the way that it interacts. It wants to know about a topic. As soon as it gets the gist of the topic, it's on to the next topic. And Uranus is not only sudden changes and epiphanies and this like electrical current of activity or these, sudden unexpected surprises and shifts. It also rules technology. It also rules the future. It rules the rebel. It rules all the things that we use in order to break out of the mold that we've been in or out of the status quo that we've been stuck in. It helps us propel into the future. And whenever we have a T square, we have something that is really obvious in our lives that is showing up. And especially with Uranus. Uranus is something grand, something big, something that pops off that just changes everything. Think of quantum leaping, that is Uranus. Uranus is quantum leaping. You may also feel and notice leading up to this eclipse and during the eclipse that our nervous system feels a little bit more overstimulated. And that's because we have Mercury involved in Virgo and in this square with Uranus. We may feel this a lot more somatically and physically and just emotional with this Pisces lunar eclipse. Watch for things like bizarre dreams, nervous system overstimulation, feeling highly anxious, racing thoughts, and maybe overanalyzing certain situations, information overload, taking in way too much than you actually have time to absorb and understand and process. You could feel like there's a difficulty in holding your concentration, almost like you're being thrown from one thing to the next thing. And with that, trying to mentally catch up to everything. I know for me, I've got about 4 things that I need to complete this month, and I feel a very heavy overwhelm trying to complete them while still juggling everything else. And it does feel overwhelming. It feels like I just want to remove myself out of the situation, plant myself somewhere across the world where I'm disconnected from social media, when I'm disconnected from other people, and just complete the things that I need to complete to wrap them up so that I can move forward and move on. It's going to feel different for everybody, but perhaps there's something that you're going through that you can really feel building in intensity. For me, my dreams have been so bizarre. I had a very weird dream of being on a cruise ship in the ocean. And I'll share this because a couple of days ago, I asked my friends who I was with, does anybody know how to interpret dreams? And no one knew how to interpret dreams. So I sort of just left it. It's kind of like out in the open, but I'm still thinking about it. And I had a dream last night that had a very similar vibe to it. But this one really stood out to me because it involved my mom. And we were on this cruise ship. And each level of the cruise ship meant that you were moving up in your status. So the first level, there was no access to the outside. You were inside. There was a lot of people, and you would take an elevator up when you were ready to progress onto the next level. And every level that you went up, you were given a little bit more luxury, a little bit more of a slightly different experience. And then we finally made it to the top level. So when we started, it was morning. And when we made it to the top level, this was like the elitist level. We walked out of the elevator, there was security, there were people walking around with champagne and all of this, like, it was just very fancy. It was like a black tie event. We were all of a sudden wearing these dresses, and there was a balcony that you could walk out on and you could overlook the ocean. And the sun had already set now beneath the horizon, and you could see the different colors of the sunset, but with the sun beneath, it was quite dark. And the ocean at the same time was also very dark. And I remember looking out at the ocean, which seemed so far away because we were so high up. And I looked into the direction that we were moving, and there was this massive wave. It looked like it was as big as the ship. And we went up. It's like I could feel it in my body. We went up, and I could feel this lifting through my body. And all of a sudden, we plummeted down, and it felt like we were free falling. And that's when I woke up, and I was like, what does that mean? So if you have any insight or experience in dream interpretation, leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's stuck with me. And I thought, like, maybe it has to do with my mom. Maybe it has to do with, well, today I found out that an actress passed away. I think she was, for speaking out against someone who'd wronged her, even though she didn't mention the name, but somebody in area, I'm being very vague, but in the area that she worked in, and she trusted this woman, and this woman is the one that led her to the situation when I think she was underage. And so anyways, maybe it has something to do with like the fall of elitism. I don't know. It's just very bizarre. Anyways, back to the chart, because this is more important right now. So pay attention to your dreams. Pay attention to the insights that come up within you. Pay attention to your intuition, your intuitive hits. That's all going to be very, very strong between now and this lunar eclipse, and maybe even a little bit after this lunar eclipse. But whenever we're in this eclipse window, the veil is very thin. And this eclipse window feels particularly important because it's the closing out of one cycle and the opening up of another cycle. So it feels like you're exhaling and you're reaching the bottom of the exhale, and that bottom space where you kind of sit in that void. If you're familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza, he talks about the void. And it's almost like there's nothing there. There's no plan, there's no form, there's no purpose. It just feels like, what's next? You're kind of in this like standstill. What's next? That's what this eclipse feels like. It feels like we get this information and then we're just in this void, and we'll be in this void for a little bit, especially during until the next eclipse season. I'm talking about this lunar node story that we're moving through, with the next eclipse season happening in January and February. It's going to be very interesting to see what comes up during that time. But right now, it's almost like there's this big release and then nothing. And it's truly that nothing can feel terrifying for a lot of us, especially if we're used to being busy. But that nothing space, that space of the void, is the space that hosts the most potential. So just keep that in mind. It holds the most potential for whatever it is that you're working through, whatever it is that you desire. That is when you can plant seeds. I think that we're going to have a lot of power in how we manifest our new beginnings, or how we manifest our future, especially with the North Node entering Aquarius. And Aquarius is ruled by Uranus in the modern sense. So this eclipse is giving us some information, something that feels drastic, big, surprising, something that clicks. Maybe we just get that information, we're like, oh my gosh, I get it now. I understand it now. That's going to be the vibe of this lunar eclipse in general. If you think back to I think it was the 14th of August, where we had the Leo solar eclipse. Solar eclipses are supercharged new moons, but it was a south node eclipse. So that was like the beginning of the end. And now this just feels like that final thread is releasing. And if you look over the last 18 months, it'll give you a lot of information on, like, what have you learned about discernment? What have you learned about being organized? What have you learned about trying to control outcomes? What have you learned about releasing and letting go and allowing things to just be as they are? What have you learned about your beliefs, your own personal health, your service to others, or your service to the world, or how you play a role in this grander experience of life? What have you learned about boundaries, or spirituality, or your faith, or, sacrifice? What have you learned about escapism? At what moments do you want to escape reality and try to hide or not deal with because it's too much to handle? And of course, because the North Node was in Pisces and this full moon is in Pisces, what have you learned about surrender? What have you learned about oneness? About how we're all connected? Now, because the North Node is in Aquarius, we're beginning to shift gears, like I'd mentioned, into things that feel a lot more future oriented. So we can look at things like technology and AI and how we network with each other, how we connect with people, the communities that we belong to and how those are changing and in their structure, how we gain members within that community, our friends groups, collective movements, especially that are in support of humanitarian efforts, decentralization. So instead of this top-down structure, like this elitist or like government pyramid where we have one powerful person at the top and then everybody else is like the slave, that power starts to get distributed outwards to the people instead of it being at this one peak. And that I think we'll see unfold over the next 15 years as Pluto makes its way. Like Pluto is just at the beginning stages of Aquarius, but as Pluto makes its way, it's going to completely transform this whole experience of how we function in society, whether it is in our own little mini communities or in the grander scheme of things. And especially when Pluto conjuncts the North Node, that's going to be interesting. I believe that's about 9 months to a year away. Something I really want to look at in this chart is the rulers of this moon, okay? There's two rulers. There's the modern ruler and there's the traditional ruler. The modern ruler is Neptune. And Neptune is a very slow-moving planet. It is the second slowest out of all of the planets, where Pluto is the slowest. And they're both at 3 degrees of their signs. 60 degrees apart puts them in a sextile. And so with them both retrograde, there's a lot of introspective reflection happening within us and collectively as a whole. But these two being in this sextile, if you look down right in the middle of this sextile, you can see that we have the sun at 4 degrees, which is within approximately a degree away from exactitude. And because Mercury is there next to the sun, we will include the sun's or Mercury's involvement by association. So we have this yod, which is called the finger of God. And this is really interesting because it points and funnels all of this energy to this singular point right here at the south node, which is associated with release. They're at 29 degrees, which is an anaretic degree, which creates a little bit more of like an urgency, or we look at like the mastery of that sign. And with the south node, we're really looking at the shadow aspects of that sign. The sun, which is illuminating these Virgo themes, and Mercury, which is very much associated with the intellectual processing, organizing, analyzing, restructuring. The mental sphere is really working in this chart. Because Pluto and Neptune are slow, whatever they're working through is going to take a long time. But this is a lunar eclipse, and this lunar eclipse, the sun, the one that illuminates, the one that gives the light, the one that represents our consciousness, is of this focal point. These two planets, Neptune and Pluto representing the death of and rebirth of specific ideas, ideations, plans, future events, technology, our involvement in community, all of that. And Neptune being also retrograde, but representing our connection with spirit, how we commune with spirit, how we identify as individual souls. They're funneling this energy into these two planets here, saying you need to readjust. You need to readjust your consciousness. You need to readjust how your mental processing. You need to rethink. You need to reinterpret. You need to reorganize. You need to modify. This finger of God is also known as the finger of fate, because there is a feeling of being directed in a particular way. And if Mercury is our mental sphere, and it's the ruler of this earthy sign, Virgo, how I'm seeing this is we need to recognize the power that we have as we can influence our physical environment. We can influence the physical reality that we are experiencing on this earth through our mind alone. Here we go. Connecting back to Joe Dispenza, connecting back to this topic of entering the void, and this void being this place of great potential. We have so much more power than we can even imagine and comprehend in how we influence our life and how our life unfolds in front of us. And I think over the next 18 months, we are really going to be exploring that. I think this is just the beginning, but Neptune and Pluto are working together, and they're pointing all of their energy at the sun while it's conjunct the south node, we need to release these old limiting beliefs that we do not have the power. We absolutely do have the power. We need to change the way we think. We need to change the way we speak. We need to change our decision-making process. We need to get really clear on what it is that we want and know that we can adjust at any moment in time, that we should adjust whenever adjustment is called for. And I'm really hoping that this realization, whatever is popping up at this time, is giving some sort of insight, a dose into that reality. You know, it's like that light bulb is like, you know, getting really bright, and now we can see it. Now we can see it. Your mental space has so much power when you can sit with it and you can be in control of it. When you can meditate on it, you can influence your reality. Pisces rules meditation. Pisces rules leaving this like physical plane, right? Our physical body is very Virgo. And our mental, you know, the calculations that happen within our brain, that's very Virgo. Pisces is the dissolving of. We dissolve the boundaries of, and we become one with everything around us. We recognize that the energy that sits in the air that we breathe is a part of us, that we are just in this continuous exchange and flow of energy. And because Neptune is retrograde, we are in this stage of reassessment and reprocessing. We're reassessing and reprocessing our ideals, our projections, our spiritual beliefs, our fantasies, our longings, the meaning that we've assigned to certain experiences. And it's fascinating because Mercury in Virgo is asking us to simultaneously examine what the information is saying, what we're seeing, and what that means. So this is a very powerful triangular aspect here, the yod, the finger of fate, the finger of God. And it's important because Neptune is the modern ruler. Jupiter is the traditional ruler of Pisces, and its presence in Leo is very important because we have the South Node now moving through Leo as well. And Jupiter was just in opposition with Pluto, and it was magnifying things that really needed adjustment and shifting and change. It was magnifying how we show up and how others show up for us. It was magnifying things in terms of leadership. It was magnifying our self-confidence, our self-empowerment. It was magnifying a lot, and it will continue to magnify. But now it's moved away from Pluto. So the intensity and the pressure from Pluto is no longer there, and Jupiter is really just expanding and breathing now. It's in a trine with Saturn. Saturn is retrograde in Aries, and Jupiter is direct in Leo. So with Jupiter in Leo, it's really expanding our confidence, our identity, our creativity, our self-expression, our sovereignty, our leadership, and our willingness to be who we are, to take up space, to express our radiance, the authentic radiance of who we are, and everything that comes out of us is heart-centered because Leo rules the heart. And Saturn being in a trine, it's a supportive aspect. In Aries is saying, be intentional with how you show up. Not in a manipulative way, but more like, you know, if you are going to express yourself in a certain way, be mindful of how you are expressing yourself or who you're expressing yourself to and what you're saying. How are you not only expressing who you are, but what is the environment? What are the circumstances around it? Because this is contributing to your identity. So who are you becoming, and what are you building, and how are you showing up, and what type of person do you want to be? How do you want people to see you? Is what this trine is asking. One other aspect I want to explore is Mars in Cancer, which is in its fall, and Saturn in Aries, which is also in its fall. So these two planets are the malefics, and they're both in their fall. So they're both not powerful. They don't have the environment to fully express the way that they typically would express. So with Mars in Cancer, it's like trying to sprint through water. And with Saturn in Aries, it's like turning your e-brake on while the car is moving. you know, like there's opposing energies here and they're in a square with each other. So it can be very frustrating. I feel like this square is extremely frustrating. So what this is telling me is that this lunar eclipse is offering this insight, this sudden realization, whatever it is that's coming up and popping off, but there's not much that we can do about it right now. And it kind of feels powerless, to be honest with you. With the moon in Pisces, there is this element of surrender. This is very much like a live and let live situation. You know, you just have to let things be as they are. Just release, let go. And there's no action right now that you can take that's going to change the situation. It's eclipse season after all. Eclipse seasons typically have very karmic outcomes and situations that happen that feel like they're outside of our control. And you have to just roll with it. We will have a little bit more authority over our actions and how we can influence outcomes later. But right now, during this lunar eclipse, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like a major, major release. You just need to feel into it. You need to become one with it. You need to be present with it. Rather than escaping it, be present with it, because your presence is going to influence how everything unfolds later. How you think right now, how you mentally process, how you look at situations, your perspective is going to have an influence on how things unfold for you later. Don't forget, you contain so much power within your mind, within your consciousness, into how everything unfolds for you in life. And not everything is going to go your way, but you can at least influence a huge majority of it. Sometimes things happen that are outside of our control and we have no control over it, and that's okay. But you can influence and control how you react to it and how you move forward from that moment. So we don't give away our power anymore. Instead, we keep our power within us. But right now, we are just seeing what's happening. We're understanding. We're watching things unfold as they are. Okay, before we close out, I want to share with you that as a yoga instructor and as an astrologer, I have found a way to bring together these two loves of mine. And with yoga instruction, it's not just the physical practice of yoga. Many people think that it's just a physical practice. It's not. The true experience of yoga is to blend, to bring together, to yoke together mind, body, and spirit. And there's so much to say about this, but I'll keep it very streamlined. You have the physical practice to prepare your body to sit and breathe, to do breath work, and you do breath work in order to prepare your mind for meditation. So for this lunar eclipse, I am hosting a one-time event. It is $12 to join. You can join by signing up in the link below in my description. And it's going to be a 90-minute lunar yoga for the Pisces lunar eclipse. The Pisces lunar eclipse is going to be happening at midnight on the 28th, and this event is going to be on the 26th. It'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So again, adjust for your time zone as needed. And I will offer a replay for 24 hours after the event. I want it to be within the peak where the moon is still moving through Pisces. Once the moon moves out of Pisces, we're sort of out of that window and it may not be as effective. But we are aligning our physical body, our energy body, and our mental body with the energy of the cosmos. And in that space, we can sit and we can have a guided meditation experience that's going to help influence how everything unfolds in front of you, how everything unfolds in the months ahead. It's very powerful, especially if you do this on a regular basis, which I have been experimenting with. And I think it's been extremely powerful, extremely fun, transformative to say the least. So if you're interested in that, make sure you sign up below. I will close out by saying, I want you to really pay attention to what's coming up, what's releasing, what's showing up for you, what's sort of starting, what sort of information, what bits of information are you receiving? Because all of that is going to play a massive role in understanding what is going to unfold over the next 6 months. All right, that's all I have for you. I wish you a beautiful rest of your eclipse season. And until next time, take care.